Hello dear viewers, a very warm welcome to our channel. It's very good to have you here. In this video, we're going to have a look at top symptoms of a failing piston ring. The piston ring is there to produce an airtight seal between the cylinder combustion chamber and the crankcase. Now the piston rings, they allow free movement of the piston, but they form an airtight seal that will help keep the compression inside the combustion chamber when piston is moving up and down. As you can see, there are multiple piston rings to be used per cylinder. For example, right here we have two compression rings and we have one oil scraper ring. Now the upper two are used for compression, but the lower one, which is called the oil ring, will help to scrap any oil that is splashed onto the cylinder wall, and it will also ensure the cylinder will get lubricated. So the first two grooves are for compression ring, the lower wider one is for oil control ring. Now when piston is moving up and down, there is an oil to be splashed on the lower side of the cylinder. Oil that is going to be splashed on the cylinder wall will help lubricate the cylinder wall. Now that oil has to be prevented from passing into the combustion chamber. So that is controlled by the lower oil control ring. And when piston is moving TDs to TDC on the compression stroke, the air fuel mixture that is going to be compressed in here should not be leaking into the crankcase. That is prevented from leaking by the two compression rings for this particular engine. So as the piston is moving up and down, airtight seal is produced by these piston rings. Now when these piston rings go bad, the engine will have some symptoms, some indications are there. External symptoms are there in order to indicate what is the status of the piston ring. Well, the first symptom of a bad piston ring is loss of compression. As I have said earlier, the air fuel mixture to be compressed into this cylinder should be prevented from leaking into the crankcase by the piston ring. Now, when the piston rings go bad, we will have low compression. So that is indication of a worn out piston ring. Engine power will decrease. That is the other symptom. Engine power and acceleration will decrease because the power that is going to be generated inside the cylinder depends on how much air fuel mixture is admitted and how well that is compressed. If the compression is low, if there is too much air compression leaking from the cylinder, then that will cause reduced power and acceleration. So the other symptom is reduced power and acceleration. The main indication, however, is when there is oil related problem. For example, if you notice there is frequent low oil level, the oil that is going to be lubricating this will pass into the combustion chamber and start burning with the incoming air fuel mixture if the piston ring gap has increased. So frequent low oil level indicates either oil is passing through this, passing past the piston ring and getting burned inside the cylinder. So excessive oil consumption or frequent low oil level can also indicate a faulty piston ring. Now when oil is burning inside the cylinder, the other indication is you will have excessive exhaust smoke. For example, if a small amount of oil is combusted inside this cylinder, you will be having a blue smoke coming from the tailpipe. But if massive oil is leaking into the combustion chamber, however, due to that excessive combustion of hydrocarbon which is coming from the oil, you will have excessive black smoke, just like a rich mixture. So excessive black smoke can also indicate excessive oil is getting admitted into the combustion chamber, and when that gets burned, it will produce black smoke. So oil related problems, frequent low oil and blue smoke or black smoke coming from the tailpipe, all these indicate oil is leaking into the combustion chamber and getting mixed to the incoming air fuel mixture. The other indication of a bad piston ring is when there is too much play. Now the piston should not be moving to the side. If the piston starts moving from side to side, we call it a piston slap. This piston, it should not be rocking sideways. That is prevented from excessively rocking by the help of the piston rings. Now, if the piston rings are worn out, obviously the gap will increase and that will cause excessive piston slap. So if you hear excessive piston slap, it's like a knocking sound, loud knocking sound coming from the slap of the piston. That is indicative of a worn out piston ring as well. The other symptom of excessive wear at the piston ring is when there is too much blow-by inside the crankcase, when there is excessive blow-by. Blow-by is when the compressed air fuel mixture leaks into the crankcase. Now, it was supposed to be prevented from leaking by the help of the piston rings, but if the piston rings are not sealing enough, that will increase pressure inside the crankcase. So, increased crankcase pressure or increased blow-by is an indication of worn out piston rings. Increased blow-by can be pinpointed by simply removing the dipstick. Then, if there is excessive smoke coming from the dipstick when you disconnect and run the engine, that indicates excessive blow-by. Or in some cases, if you open the oil filler neck and look at the oil filler neck when the engine is running, if there is excessive smoke coming, that also indicates crankcase pressure has increased or we have excessive blow-by. So excessive blow-by is also caused by worn out piston rings. Now, the other thing that is indicative of worn out piston ring is when there is excessive oil leakage from the engine. What happens is when there is excessive blow-by coming from here, that will increase the pressure in this crankcase. Now, when this pressure increases inside the crankcase, oil will start to overcome the seals. Seals are there. There is one seal on the crankshaft side. There is also a seal on the front side. All those seals, due to the increased pressure, they fail to hold oil. So if you see oil leakage from the seals, seals will get damaged if there is excessive crankcase pressure. So the increase of oil leakage from the engine can also be attributed to worn out piston ring. The worn out piston ring increased blow-by will increase crankcase pressure. When crankcase pressure increases, it will overcome the seals and oil start to leak out. The other indication of failing piston ring is when there is oil inside the intake manifold. Now some engines, they turn to direct the blow-by gas into the intake manifold. Now, if there is oil inside the intake manifold, if you put your finger like this and see excessive oil inside the intake manifold, it is usually an indication of worn out piston ring, because when the piston rings wear out, as we have said, excessive blow-by will be there. That increased blow-by will scoop some oil from the oil pan and then send it through the positive crankcase ventilation, and the positive crankcase ventilation will introduce that to the intake manifold. Then if you see excessive oil inside the intake manifold, that can indicate worn out piston ring. So oil inside the intake manifold can also be indicative of a worn out piston ring. So anything that is associated with low compression, for example, when you measure the compression pressure inside the cylinder and you find out the compression is low, that can pinpoint a problem. Now, in order to figure out if the compression loss is actually caused by the piston ring, not by improperly sealing valve, you can always squirt some oil into the cylinder when doing compression test. If that oil seals and compression somehow improves, it indicates the piston ring was initially at fault. But if the compression remains the same, it means the leakage is not down to the crankcase, rather it is leaking up. It could be caused by improper valve seal. It could be caused by improper valve seat function as well. So that is how you can tell if the leakage is down into the crankcase or up into the cylinder head. So these are some of the top indicatives of a failing piston ring. Now, if the piston ring is gone bad, there are a couple of things that need to be done. The piston and the piston ring, they have to be replaced. And in some cases, the cylinder also might require reboring. The cylinder might require some kind of reboring. Or on some engines, you can remove the liner. If the liner is excessively worn, liners will be inserted, new piston and new piston rings can also be installed. But if the wear is only minor, only replacing the piston ring might fix the issue. Well, dear viewers, that is all we have for you in regarding some of the top symptoms of failing piston ring. In order to review, excessive engine smoke, either it is blue or sometimes black, or frequent low oil level, low compression, decreased power and acceleration, piston slapping, increased crankcase pressure or increased blow-by, and oil start to leak from the crankcase. All this can indicate a compression loss caused by worn out piston ring. Well, reviewers, that is all we have for you regarding some of the top symptoms indicating a failing piston ring. If you find this video helpful and if you like what has been presented, please smash the like button. If you are new to this channel, do consider subscribing. Turn on notifications so that you will be the first to get notified whenever we come up with another video. Until then, stay safe.